176. Today they begin on a 16 without loss in their second innings. At Taunton, Somerset bowled out Derbyshire for 139 yesterday and today begin on 93 for 5. On to the travel news now from AA Road Watch. No major hold-ups at the moment, but there's a contraflow around junction 11 of the M5, the Cheltenham-Golden Valley turnoff. And heading onto the M4 from M32, there are roadworks on the westbound entry Slip Road. No problems to report on the region's trains at the moment. The weather forecast cloudy at first with patchy mist, but becoming brighter during the day. Temperatures up to 21 Celsius, that's 70 degrees Fahrenheit with moderate or fresh westerly winds.
Good morning and welcome to the BBC's Breakfast News with Sophie Rayworth and John Sopel.
Good morning. President Clinton defends his decision to attack suspected terrorist targets in Sudan and Afghanistan. Reports say at least 15 people were killed.
In his second live television address of the week, the president insists he was targeting fanatics and killers.
There are no expendable American targets. There will be no sanctuary for terrorists. We will defend our people, our interests, and our values.
But there's anger in Sudan as demonstrators storm the US embassy in protest at the strikes.
And today's other main story, why a glass a day can stop you getting pregnant. New research suggests that alcohol can stop women conceiving.
And Isabel Lang is here with this morning's weather.
Thanks, John. Good morning to you. Well, becoming brighter for many areas this afternoon, although there will be some showers in northern Britain. Then for the weekend, well, mainly dry across southeastern areas, but rain gradually pushing its way in from the west. And it will be quite breezy, I think, during Sunday. John.
The United States has said that its missile attacks on Sudan and Afghanistan were justified on the grounds of self-defense. A news agency in Afghanistan says that 15 people were killed in the attacks there. The Sudanese government is expected to file a complaint to the United Nations Security Council in protest.
President Clinton said the aim of the strike was to hit the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden, who's been linked to the US embassy bombings in Africa. The missile attack on Afghanistan was near Jalalabad in the east of the country. It's believed the missiles were launched from US Navy vessels in the Arabian Sea. Cruise missiles are also thought to have been fired from US ships in the Red Sea at a pharmaceutical factory at Shifa near the Sudanese capital, Khartoum.
The Shifa pharmaceutical factory in Khartoum burned through the night. A symbol, say the Americans, that there can be no safe haven for international terrorists. US officials say the ingredients for deadly nerve gas were being manufactured here. On Sudanese television, the allegation was dismissed. Emphasis was placed on the civilians wounded by America's unwarranted aggression. Earlier this week, President Clinton had been the sinning husband making a public confession. Yesterday, he was the commander-in-chief, declaring before his fellow Americans a virtual war on terror.
There are no expendable American targets. There will be no sanctuary for terrorists. We will defend our people, our interests, and our values. We will help people of all faiths in all parts of the world who want to live free of fear and violence. We will persist, and we will prevail.
Cruise missiles were launched at targets in Sudan and Afghanistan just 2 weeks after the US embassy bombs in Kenya and Tanzania. Hundreds of American investigators have been in East Africa hunting for the bombers. This man, Osama bin Laden, the wealthy Islamic militant based in Afghanistan, was declared responsible for the embassy bombs in a secret CIA briefing a week ago. The president and military chiefs decided to act, to preempt, it's now claimed, another bin Laden attack.
Our forces targeted one of the most active terrorist bases in the world. We have reason to believe that a gathering of key terrorist leaders was to take place there today, thus underscoring the urgency of our actions.
Talking of timing, as the cruise missiles were being launched, Monica Lewinsky was again testifying in Washington. Some critics of the president suspect a deliberate diversion.
We fear that we may have a president that is desperately seeking to hold on to his job in the face of a firestorm of criticism and calls for him to step down.
In Wag the Dog, a film released earlier this year, a president beset by sex scandals stages a phony war.
We want you to produce. You want me to produce your war?
Could it be that life is imitating art?
The only motivation driving this action today was our absolute obligation to protect the American people from terrorist activities.
In Khartoum, the American embassy, currently empty, was attacked by Sudanese protesters. Amid fears of further violence, the U.S. government has told all Americans abroad to exercise caution. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Washington.
And joining me from Washington is our correspondent Clive Murray. Clive, what's the latest from government sources there? Is there an expectation that there could be more attacks?
Well, Sophie, that very much depends on the success of the two attacks in Afghanistan and Sudan, and whether or not any more threats are made by terrorists against American citizens. The Secretary of State here, Madeleine Albright, and Bill Cohen, the Defense Secretary, have made it clear that this is a war against terrorism, and it could be a long war. Therefore, if we do get more threats, then maybe there could be more attacks by US forces.
Well, President Clinton has explained in his televised address his reasons for carrying out the attacks, but many people are still saying, why now?
Yes, there is a level of skepticism as to the timing of these attacks. It must be remembered that President Clinton does have a credibility problem here. He's made it clear that he did mislead the country as far as the Monica Lewinsky scandal is concerned, that he has lied in the past, and that perhaps has raised a level of cynicism in the American people as to his actions, and that perhaps is being reflected in some of the reaction to the attacks yesterday.
And no doubt there will be fear among the American people that this is just going to set off a whole new wave of attacks.
Yes, to a degree. We're already hearing reports of reprisal attacks in Southeast Asia. We understand that the State Department has already issued an advisory to all Americans outside the US to be on their guard, to be vigilant, and indeed the FBI has warned US citizens here to be careful as well.
Osama bin Laden was the man who is the focus of all this and was constantly mentioned by name in President Clinton's address. Yet, how sure are they that he is behind them?
The White House says it's very sure that it has enough intelligence data supplied by the Pentagon and the CIA to suggest that this man is the culprit behind certainly the African bombings, at least. And Mr. bin Laden has made it clear over the last few days, indeed the last couple of years, that American targets are legitimate targets in the so-called holy war, the fatwa against American imperialism. The finger seems to point very much at this man, and the Americans are hoping that the attacks in Afghanistan and Sudan will somehow knock out his terrorist infrastructure.
Clive Murray in Washington, thank you for joining us.
Preparations are underway in Omagh for an open-air service of prayer and reflection. Organisers are expecting about 40,000 people to attend tomorrow's service, which will be held in Market Street, where the bomb killed 28 people last Saturday. Religious leaders are also asking people in the whole of Ireland, north and south, to observe a minute's silence in memory of the victims.
Women who are trying to conceive should avoid drinking alcohol, according to a study in today's British Medical Journal. It found that women's alcohol intake significantly reduced the chances of pregnancy, even for those drinking relatively small amounts.
It's well known that women who drink heavily take longer to get pregnant. But this is the first evidence that drinking any alcohol at all can reduce fertility. The study showed that women drinking 10 units of alcohol or more a week, that's the equivalent of 10 glasses of wine, were half as likely to conceive as those drinking only 5 glasses. But contrary to previous studies which have shown that moderate drinking makes no difference, the study also showed that even a few drinks a week reduced the likelihood of conception. For men, the quantity of alcohol consumed seemed to have no effect at all. But the message from this study to women trying to conceive is to avoid alcohol completely. It may not be welcome news to women who are already subjected to advice on their diet and urged to give up smoking before getting pregnant as well as after. Exactly how moderate drinking makes a difference isn't yet known, though alcohol is known to inhibit ovulation in rats. This new study of alcohol and pregnancy was a rigorous one, however, involving 430 couples in Denmark aged 20 to 35, all trying to conceive for the first time. The researchers who carried it out said further studies would be needed to confirm the findings, but that in the meantime, women trying to get pregnant should stick to soft drinks only. Christine McGurty, BBC News.
The Lord Chancellor, Lord Irvine, is planning to reform the way Crown Courts operate in England and Wales in order to save time. He wants to introduce computers to try to speed up court procedures. The cost of the new technology has been put at £50 million.
The search will resume later this morning for a honeymoon couple who it's feared have drowned in a river in the Yorkshire Dales. Hopes of finding Lynn and Barry Collett alive are fading. The couple are believed to have fallen into the River Wharfe at Bolton Abbey near Skipton.
A noisy office can seriously affect the way you work. That's according to a survey by the British Psychological Society. It says too much background noise can reduce the performance of staff by up to a third. Worst affected were those trying to complete tasks that require a lot of memory or mental arithmetic at work.
The Russian parliament, the Duma, is due to begin an emergency debate about now the country's financial crisis. It's been triggered by the decision on Monday to devalue the ruble. There's expected to be calls for President Yeltsin to resign, but he's away reviewing naval exercises in the Arctic.
The Russian Prime Minister Sergei Kiriyenko is this morning returning to the scene of hard-fought battles. Just 4 months ago, he had to speak to the Russian parliament, the Duma, 3 times in order to get himself accepted as premier. Today, he's trying to sell the government's economic stabilization measures to a parliament that has been specially called back from its summer break. In an emergency session, deputies will be asked to consider those measures that the Duma did not pass before the recess began in July. Their task is made all the more urgent by the government's decision earlier this week to stop defending the ruble and permit an effective devaluation. Opposition deputies have seen this as an admission that the government's economic policy has failed. Yesterday, the head of Russia's central bank had to appeal for calm amid fears that people would try to withdraw their savings and cause a collapse in the banking system. President Boris Yeltsin is widely seen as having been weakened by the current financial crisis. Communist and nationalist deputies may use the emergency session of the Duma to call for his impeachment. But the Russian constitution is weighted in the president's favour, and impeachment a long and complicated process. James Rogers, BBC News, Moscow.
A woman in Yorkshire has undergone an operation that's being hailed as a major breakthrough in microsurgery. The woman's hand was badly injured in an industrial accident, and surgeons were forced to remove 3 of her fingers and graft them onto her arm. Now, more than a year later, they've successfully regrafted them back onto the woman's hand. Some viewers may find parts of this report upsetting.
I have a pair of scissors and I want to thread these nerve grafts through.
The young patient, who wishes to remain anonymous, is in St James's Hospital in Leeds. The operation is planned to take 10 hours. A team of microsurgeons has first replaced the fingers. A thumb has been reconstructed from a second toe. Blood supply, nerves, tendons and bones have to be restored. All are essential if the first multi-digit transplant ever recorded is to be successful. The accident destroyed the palm of her hand, but 3 fingers were unharmed. By removing them, and by what microsurgeons describe as storing them on the other forearm, the fingers can be supplied with blood until the injured hand is ready for reconstruction.
Well, it's strange, but I'm thankful that he's decided to try it out on me as a guinea pig, really. But I'm thankful he did it because I now have a second chance. And maybe it'll help someone else that maybe has a similar accident.
It'll be weeks before doctors know the degree of success, but the patient can expect to lift, squeeze and pinch her fingers. She wants to cook a Sunday lunch, just one of hundreds of everyday activities that were so cruelly ended 8 months ago. Richard Wells, BBC News, Leeds.
And the time now is 13 minutes past 7, and coming up in the next hour, the lifeguard who started work during World War II and is still going strong.
When the first bikini came on the beach, a big crowd gathered around, and I looked up in the tower back there. I said, what's going on? It wasn't that brief either. The cops had to take her off the beach. It nearly caused a riot. Now they're wearing dental floss and calling it bathing suits.
Morning from Edinburgh, where later in the programme I'll be asking what happens to the arts when Scotland has its own parliament.
America's attack on what President Clinton described as one of the most active terrorist bases in the world is believed to have been aimed at just one man, Osama bin Laden. A millionaire Saudi, he's thought to have been behind a number of attacks on American targets in the last 5 years. Sources in Afghanistan insist he was unharmed by the attack. But why has he become the focus of American concerns?
Terrorism operates in the shadows, but Osama bin Laden is no ordinary terrorist. His anti-American views are openly declared, his base in Afghanistan well known. But above all, it's his wealth which ensures his prominence.
He's been denounced many times from the USA and from various Muslim countries and others where he's either organized actions which have led to a lot of deaths or tried to organize them. And he's an extremely well-known figure, partly because he's put his money and his grievances at the hands of a lot of other terrorist groups.
Osama bin Laden was born in Saudi Arabia in 1957, inheriting a family fortune of millions of pounds, acquired through the construction business. In 1979, he volunteered to fight against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, developing a passionate commitment to Islam, which was equally hostile to the Americans. They've linked him to the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, the murder of 19 American soldiers in Saudi Arabia in 1996, and the attacks on the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania 2 weeks ago. Bin Laden's principal motivation is the presence in Saudi Arabia of American troops, particularly in holy places like Mecca, even though his family made some of its fortune from helping to construct US bases there.
Saudi Arabia is the holy land for Muslims, and not only Mecca and Medina. According to bin Laden and other Muslims, there should be no one but Muslims living there, and certainly no one but Muslim troops.
The timing of America's response to the embassy bombings has led some observers to suspect President Clinton of using bin Laden to deflect attention from his own domestic problems. Those who sympathize with the terrorists' aims, if not their means, believe the American attacks will simply strengthen his position.
By attacking Afghanistan now, they make every Muslim believe that he is bin Laden. Bin Laden today become the real leaders of the Muslims worldwide. He is a symbolic of struggle against oppressors.
The United States risks not just retaliation, but turning bin Laden into an Islamic hero. Sean Lay, BBC News.
Well, to assess the situation, I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Zaki Badawi, who's the principal of the Muslim College in London. Good morning.
Good morning.
What do you think the reaction is going to be now?
I'm afraid the reaction would be very bad for America. When the two embassies were bombed, tremendous sympathy was expressed by everybody, including myself and everyone, for the Americans and the condemnation of the act of terror. Now America, without real evidence, not known evidence at all, started attacking two Muslim countries.
But the Americans are going to contradict that. They already have said that they have convincing evidence that these are the groups that played key roles in the embassy bombings.
The Americans are acting as judge and jury and executioner. They've got to make us share with them and be convinced of their evidence, rather than acting on suspicion. You see, it's very easy to attack in defenseless countries like Sudan and Afghanistan. Had either of these countries had any power to retaliate against America, America would have been very hesitant, and indeed it would never have dared to send rockets against them.
Yet America would say that this is obviously based on intelligence sources, and they were saying that the actual timing is all to do with the fact that there was a gathering of key terrorist leaders who were planning more attacks.
Again, that's complete nonsense. You see, one of the assumptions is that these terrorist groups have one central command and the command structure. This is complete rubbish, because these groups normally fight against each other. They don't really have a central figure at all. Bin Laden has made into a hero by the attack on him and by the media in the West. That he was, and remember, who is Bin Laden? Bin Laden was an ally of the Americans. He was cooperating for a long time during the war in Afghanistan with the CIA. And most of his people were trained by Americans. So the whole situation now has become very bad, because America has been following a policy which is a wrong policy. If you read The Economist of last week, it had a whole article about Mrs. Albright and how her policies were frustrated by the White House.
So if they're following the wrong policy, what should they be doing? They had these 2 bombings in Africa. They want to take some action. They want to catch those who were responsible.
Oh yes, they want to take some action, but it's got to be the right action.
What's the right action?
In my view, 2 things. First, to establish who is the criminal, not just by themselves guessing. I mean, after all, after Oklahoma, the press all over the world accused the Islamists. Probably a president then could have actually acted in the same way. We want to be convinced that really the finger pointed at bin Laden is really the right finger.
But it's very difficult, isn't it? Because they say their intelligence sources do just that.
Well, unfortunately, I do not trust Mr. Clinton's statements at all. I mean, after all, he is the man who smoked and never inhaled. He is the man who actually took advantage of a young woman in his trust and then turned around to say it was not sexual relations. I would like to have more trustworthy source to say that bin Laden and the Islamists were responsible for this particular action.
It's very difficult to predict, but what do you think the next few weeks hold?
I'm afraid, the action of the Americans will give more recruits for Mr. bin Laden and his groups, rather than the other way. What I believe always, the way to defeat terrorism is really to negotiate and to talk to them and to deflate their own enthusiasm. Terrorism is something abhorrent to everybody, but also a sense of justice, an act to show that there is a policy and there are values in American policy that would convince other people not to resist it.
Dr. Badar, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll certainly have plenty more of that in the programme later this morning.
Time now is 7:20. Well, something resembling Baywatch might be most people's ideas of the glamorous world of the American lifeguard, but the reality can be a bit different, especially if you happen to be rescued on the beaches of Long Island. Instead of a Pamela Anderson lookalike dragging you from the surf, it's more likely to be 71-year-old Reggie Jones. Reggie claims to be the oldest lifeguard in the world.
The surf and sand at Jones Beach provide the perfect antidote to the stresses of life in the concrete canyons of New York. And every year, hundreds of thousands of swimmers take to the water here. Perched high above them are the members of the Long Island Lifeguard Brigade. But this is a million miles from the Baywatch world of perfectly honed pectorals. This is the real world of Mr. Reggie Jones. At 71 years old, Reggie is something of a legend in these parts. He's been saving lives in these waters for 55 years, during which time he's seen a fair few changes.
I remember when the first bikini came on the beach, a big crowd gathered around, and I looked up in the tower back there, and I said, what's going on? It wasn't that brief either. The cops had to take her off the beach. It nearly caused a riot. Now they're wearing dental floss and calling it bathing suits.
Reggie's first day on the job was during World War II, and he's seen active beach duty every year since. His is the most common face in the photos here in the Lifeguard Hall of Fame. The lifeguard stations are well staffed and regularly spaced along the beach, and the tides here are generally fairly tame. But make no mistake, Reggie Jones is not just here making up the numbers. The physical standards are onerous, and he has never failed a fitness test. Indeed, at a time in life when most men his age are happy to take it easy, Reggie's physical regimen is taxing enough to put many younger men to shame.
He's an excellent swimmer. He's excellent in the boat. And again, for 71 years, he holds his own with the young guys. He will, in the competition this week, he will place probably in the top 3.
Red flag means you can't swim.
Out on the beach, the bathers too have no complaints about their guardian.
Yeah, he looks like he's in shape for 71. I like him, the older the better.
Really?
Yeah.
It doesn't look a day over 55.
And you wouldn't prefer a younger guy with big muscles and a Baywatch tan?
No, I'd be afraid that all the girls would be around him and he wouldn't be paying attention.
Reggie's lost count of the number of lives he's saved. But he says even if he doesn't reach his target of 60 years service, it's still been a job well done.
Every once in a while, I think, I really contributed something to humanity. You don't get a chance very often to save a human being if you're just an average Joe walking around. But out here, you do get that opportunity quite a number of times in the summer. And I'm really kind of happy about the fact that maybe 30 or 40 people are walking around today that are there because of me.
Taimur Nabili, BBC News, at Jones Beach, New York.
What a guy.
What a terrific guy. What
Do
a
you
great
could do
voice.
that, John, at age 70?
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do what he was doing now. Weather.
You can do that.
Shall I do that bit? I can do that bit without any exercises whatsoever. The weather with Isabel Lang.
Thanks, John. Good morning to you. Well, not a bad start to the day across many parts of southern Europe, fine through the Mediterranean, up and towards Turkey and the Ukraine. But we have some thunderstorms at the moment around Italy and the Adriatic. There's quite a lot of cloud, as you can see, across much of northwest Europe, and that includes us in Britain, although there are some breaks in the north, and that'll be gradually pushing southwards through the day. And this is the scene for the weekend across Europe, staying fine and sunny across Portugal, Spain, right across the Mediterranean into Cyprus. But as you come further north, a fair amount of showers and cloud around. I think there could well be some thundery showers for the European Championships in Budapest, and temperatures there around about 25 degrees during Sunday, a little bit lower than it has been recently. Now back into Britain, and we had a pretty wet night in some places, particularly near southern Scotland and northern England. Most of the rain has now pushed out of the way, but it's rather cloudy in many parts of England and Wales with some rain and drizzle. And we're starting to see somewhat brighter skies now pushing into the north with scattered showers across northern Scotland and into Northern Ireland. Now through today, we'll get rid of that thicker area of cloud. It'll gradually push its way south and east into the near continent. So I think we will see skies brightening up a little bit. Still a lot of cloud, but some brighter spells coming through. Although I think along the Channel and in towards Devon and Cornwall, it'll cling on to some of the mist and low cloud all day. But to the north, brightening skies, and then those showers becoming rather more widespread through the afternoon and evening, especially across central and northern Scotland. Now, quite a breezy day today, especially in the south to start with, and then a noticeable cool northwesterly blowing across northern Britain. Temperatures this afternoon then in Scotland, around about 18 for Glasgow. For Belfast today, 17 Celsius with some brightness this afternoon. And probably the highest temperatures again in the southeast at 22, that's 72 Fahrenheit. And then as we head for the weekend, well, we do start to see some windier weather coming in from the west. That'll eventually bring in more rain across into western Britain during Sunday. But I think for many areas on Saturday, there will be some sunshine. Showers with the sunshine in the north, but mainly dry in the southeast. That's it.
Thank you very much. Much more coming up in the next half hour. I'll be having a look through some of the newspapers, and we'll also be having the sports news.
And, of course, news where you are after this look at the markets.
Good morning from News West. Concern is mounting over proposals for a new hospital for people in West Mendip. The old community hospital in Wells has served the town since 1896, but it could be scrapped in favour of a modern new one at Glastonbury to look after both districts. The people of Wells are worried about the future of their services. The health authority says it has to make changes because of financial constraints. A man and a woman who cut through a railway line between Frome and Whatley Quarry will be sentenced at Bristol Crown Court today. Richard Dixon from Cranmore was found guilty of causing criminal damage with intent to endanger life in June this year after using an angle grinder to slice through the rail. Rosemary Browning from Glastonbury was also convicted of the same offence. Now, for veterans from across the West, this weekend will be a time to reflect and remember what many consider to be a forgotten war. It's 50 years since the beginning of the Malayan conflict, which lasted over 12 years.
Final preparations are underway for Sunday's service. 2 flags from the Bristol and Swindon branches of the Malaya and Borneo Veterans Association will be blessed and become standards. It's 50 years since the beginning of the emergency, which was to draw 50,000 young men from 38 regiments and last 12 years.
Most of us, when we went, were 18 years old. And we did certainly grow up. We had to grow up and grow up very fast.
Sunday's service will also give veterans of the conflict a chance to remember comrades and the time they had so far away from home.
The campaign lasted twice as long as the Second World War to start with. It was 12 years in duration.
The service gets underway at 10:30 on Sunday morning at the St Stephen's Church in Soundwell.
An exhibition is taking place in Gloucestershire aimed at promoting the use of renewable energy sources. The Energy 21 trade fair is being held in Stroud, described as one of the greenest towns in Britain. Solar-powered fountains, water heating systems and ceramic stoves are amongst the exhibits, and there's also a conference and street displays, all aimed at raising awareness about clean energy. Preservation work will begin today on one of Somerset's finest churches. An anonymous donation of £230,000 means that the 15th century Ilminster Church could have its crumbling stonework renewed. It's hoped that the lower half of the Grade 1 listed building will be completed before winter and the whole project finished next summer. On to the travel news now from AA Road Watch. No major hold-ups at the moment, but there's a contraflow around junction 11 of the M5. That's the Cheltenham Golden Valley turn-off. And going into Cheltenham, the A40 Lansdowne Road is closed with diversions in operation. Heading onto the M4 from the M32, there are roadworks on the westbound entry slip road, and there are no problems to report on the region's trains at the moment. Let's have a look at the weather forecast now. It'll be cloudy at first with patchy mist, but becoming brighter during the day. Temperatures up to 21 Celsius, that's 70 degrees Fahrenheit, with moderate or fresh westerly winds.
A very good morning. It's coming up to 7:30 this morning's headlines. The Americans have launched military strikes against what they claim are terrorist bases run by the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden in Sudan and Afghanistan. There are reports that 15 people have died in Afghanistan. In Sudan, thousands of people have demonstrated outside the American embassy. And women trying to have a baby are warned that even small amounts of alcohol could reduce their chances of getting pregnant. Now, time for the sport, and here's Rob.
John, thanks. Good morning to you again. Big day for Britain today at the European Athletics Championships in Budapest. Ewan Thomas and Mark Richardson go head-to-head for gold in the 400 metres. Steve Backley and Colin Jackson start the defence of their titles. That and more on the BBC later today, with the first visit to Budapest in this programme at about 8:40. That's for Denise Lewis and the opening event in the heptathlon. More medals to follow yesterday's? Let's hope so.
The old champion was on hand to crown the new. Gold medalist Darren Campbell is the new star of British athletics. But today it's the turn of the older generation to fly the flag. Colin Jackson begins his campaign to win a third successive European gold, an achievement that would rank as the greatest of his career.
To win here it's just a huge goal, huge target, and of course, you know, for it to be the third one is like pretty exciting for me as well. This is actually the third one I've actually started in, so I'm looking forward to doing that, definitely.
Also aiming for a hat-trick of European titles is Steve Backley. The absence of his great rival Jan Selesny through injury make him the heavy favourite. And Olympic bronze medalist Denise Lewis begins the heptathlon. A gold in Budapest would confirm her as Britain's top female athlete. Not that the up-and-coming competitors are completely out of the running. Ewan Thomas here winning his semi-final, and Mark Richardson are almost certain to win gold and silver in tonight's 400 metres. But who will win which is one of the great imponderables of these championships. Sadly, though, the search for an heir to co-Cram Dovet remains fruitless. Britain's three runners in last night's 1500 metres all ended up outside the medals. Anthony Whiteman finishing in the unluckiest position of all, fourth. Ben Munro-Davis, BBC News.
Well, now the fitness of Nasser Hussain will be top of the agenda when England's cricket selectors discuss the team for the one-off test against Sri Lanka, which starts next Thursday at the Oval. He sustained a groin injury during yesterday's one-day Emirates Cup final defeat, that also by Sri Lanka, of course, whose 5-wicket win was achieved pretty much at a canter. England set a decent total of 256, with Mike Atherton scoring 64. He'd been recalled to the one-day side for the first time since last year. But an unbeaten 132 from Marvin Atapatu, including 14 boundaries, guided Sri Lanka to victory with 17 balls to spare. The home side's performance in the field did have one highlight, this magnificent catch by Nick Knight to dismiss Chandana. Despite England's indifferent one-day form, the captain still thinks they'll mount a significant challenge as hosts of next year's World Cup.
I think they're getting there. It was important to see how the white ball behaved. First time we've used the white ball in international cricket. It moved around in the first 2 games. It didn't move around quite so much today. So, you know, we've got to look at things. We'll sit down, and by the time World Cup starts, hopefully we've got the team good enough to win it.
Tennis, Craig Rosetsky continues his successful comeback from the ankle injury that's kept him out of the game for the last 2 months. The British #1 is through to the quarterfinals of the ATP tournament in Indianapolis. After beating Francisco Clavé of Spain 6-1, 7-6, he now meets the French Open finalist Alex Corretja. And Tim Henman, well, he's also in the quarterfinals of the Pilot Penn International in New Haven. Let's hope he turns up on time. He beat the Italian David Sanguinetti 4-6, 6-3, 6-3. His next opponent, the former Wimbledon champion Richard Krajicek. Well, the bitterness of Aston Villa manager John Gregory is there for all to see this morning as a reaction to finally losing Dwight Yorke to Manchester United for £12.6 million. Gregory surely didn't mean it when he said he'd have shot Yorke if he'd had a gun, but I think we get the picture. Yorke's goal-scoring form last season picked up on the previous campaign when he scored 20 goals. He becomes Manchester United's most expensive player ever and joins on a 5-year contract. Also on his travels, Christian Daly, the Scotland midfielder, has left Derby for Roy Hodgson's Blackburn Rovers, the fee just over £5 million. Golf, Darren Clarke's attempt to catch Lee Westwood at the top of Europe's order of merit gained momentum in yesterday's first round of the European Open in Dublin. Clarke here getting a birdie at the 4th, returned from a 2-week break with a 69 to leave him in second place behind Sweden's Matt Gromberg. But Westwood, who missed the cut in last week's USPGA, had another bad day. He scored a 5-over par 77, a potentially expensive series of errors since this is the European Tour's second richest event. Doesn't look a happy man. Also continuing, the introduction of Justin Rose to the harsh realities of the professional circuit. The 18-year-old faces a battle to avoid missing his 3rd successive cut after scoring a 76. Bad news, I suppose, but not as grim as the news happening elsewhere in the world. Here's Sophie with the papers.
Rob, thank you very much indeed. Well, there is only one story on the front pages of the papers this morning, and it is this. Clinton takes revenge, says The Guardian, as the US planes strike at terror camps in Afghanistan and Sudan. Featured on the front is Osama bin Laden. This is the man who President Clinton says is behind all these attacks, the recent bombings. He says that the Saudi millionaire's terrorist network is as dangerous as any state we face. The Times reports that trapped aid workers may face a backlash from militiamen. Aid workers, they say, were stunned by the news of the American attack on Afghanistan, and dozens of foreigners are still inside the country, potentially victims of a backlash. Indeed, this morning there's already been news of attacks from a group of armed men who have fired upon UN officials. The Daily Telegraph says Clinton strikes at terrorist bases. Also featured on the front of the Telegraph here is Monica Lewinsky as she arrived at the grand jury in Washington yesterday. The Telegraph reports that friends of the former White House trainee is feeling incredibly scorned. And they say that Ms. Lewinsky has insisted that the president told her they had a future together after his presidency, that he'd led her to believe that one day they might be together, and she thought they had a unique intellectual and emotional bond. The Daily Mail, it's again Clinton's revenge, there's the headlines, but was this his real target, the Arab terrorists or his critics in Washington? And finally, one paper that doesn't feature that on the front page is The Sun. Jerry's £1 million dress sale, that is their main story this morning. They say that the ex-Spice is doing a Diana. Those are the stories in the papers. Peter Fiddick will be here in an hour's time with his review of this morning's papers. But now here's Paul Burden with this morning's business news.
Thanks very much indeed, Sophie. Let's have a look at some of the main business stories this morning. Nissan's British car plant in Sunderland is the most productive car factory in Europe, making almost 100 cars per employee per year, according to a survey released today. The Sunderland plant also beat all US-based car plants and most Japanese plants, according to the latest annual production audit by the Economist Intelligence Unit, making it one of the most efficient in the world. The report adds productivity had improved across Europe as companies fought off intense competition and coped with falling margins. Tesco, Britain's largest supermarket chain, has announced plans to join forces with Esso, the country's largest petrol retailer. The move aims to bring Tesco Express convenience stores onto Esso forecourts. The company said initial trials would take place at a limited number of Esso petrol stations. The National Association of Estate Agents has criticised many homeowners for putting their houses on the market at unrealistic and over-optimistic prices. It says many prospective sellers are not taking the slowing housing market into account and are basing their expectations on last year's mini-boom. The report said that the problem is more acute in London and the South East. Now, 750,000 people will be able to shop around for their electricity in 3 weeks' time. By June next year, the market should be opened up for the rest of the UK's 26 million electricity consumers. New research from the University of Cambridge claims this will save households and businesses nearly £3 million a year. But not everyone will benefit, as Hayley Miller reports.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Could I have a box of electricity, please?
Economy or family-sized electricity?
Economy, please.
The marketing wheels are turning. For the first time, we're being made aware of who supplies and generates our electricity. By June next year, we'll be able to buy from one of 14 regional electricity companies or British Gas Trading. The suppliers are busy trying to undercut each other, and that's putting pressure on the producers.
They're going to have to look very hard at what they pay for fuel. Deals for coal and gas are going to become tougher and tougher. They'll look at manpower, how efficiently they run their power stations, how many people do you need, can you use IT to improve your efficiency. They're used to all that. It's been going on for some time, but it will get more intense.
Potential customers are being wooed by lower prices and easier ways to pay. For many domestic and small business users, that's a big attraction. But the warning is to choose carefully.
I think to make competition effective, consumers have to be able to compare the competitors in the marketplace. So there will be a need for clear information about tariffs and services so that consumers can make real comparisons to actually be able to compare and to actually put some pressure on the providers.
Discounted deals may be good news for consumers, but it seems some of us will end up with a much better deal than others. The Warwick Business School has looked at utilities already open to competition. Its research shows that with telecoms, pensioner households have lost out because they make fewer phone calls, but they still have to pay a high line rental charge. With gas and even electricity, the losers are the households which don't pay by direct debit and therefore miss out on further reductions.
Households which lose out in all three utility markets could be losing some £60 worth of savings a year, and they're likely to be those which can least afford it. But the suppliers will penalise them for using payment methods which are less cost-effective for them.
Competition should be allowed as free a rein as possible. I think what's needed is some safety mechanism to make sure that the most vulnerable aren't the ones who are paying the price. So I would rather see it done not through the competitive process, but through the social security system and the pensions.
The government is currently looking at how to address these imbalances, but an unfair price market is possibly the very nature of competition.
Hayley Miller reporting there. That's the business news for today. We'll be back after the weekend on Monday from 6 o'clock. Meantime, here's John.
Thanks very much indeed, Paul. The time now is just coming up to 19 minutes to 8. For those of you who've just joined us, a reminder of this morning's main story. The United States has described the attacks on terrorist bases in Sudan and Afghanistan as self-defense. President Clinton said the military action was aimed at the terrorist network of Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden. 15 people are reported to have died in the raids on Afghanistan.
Last Saturday, the lives of the people of Omagh changed forever. Once an ordinary, little-known Northern Irish market town, now its name will always be associated with death and destruction. On Saturday, thousands of people will converge on the town for an open-air service. Their hope is that Omagh will also be remembered as a turning point in the troubles that have racked Northern Ireland for the past 30 years.
Never before in the miserable history of Northern Ireland's troubles has so much misery been heaped on so many. This time last week, the people of Omagh were getting ready for the weekend. Today, they're looking back in disbelief at the barbarity unleashed on their town. Omagh was packed with shoppers last Saturday afternoon. At 3:10, the huge car bomb exploded. Telephone warnings had been given, but they were worse than useless. The caller indicated the vehicle had been left near the courthouse, when in fact it was at the opposite end of the street, where police thought they were directing people to safety. Ambulance staff described a scene of total carnage. Off-duty doctors and nurses rushed to the local hospital. No one there that day will ever forget what they saw.
The sight, it was like walking onto a battlefield, really. There was blood everywhere. It screaming children. There was people even blocking the door of casualty, rushing by each other, trying to get in. And there was ones covered in shrapnel. There was ones with major injuries. There's ones with minor injuries.
All day Saturday, people waited, frantic for news of their relatives.
These are names of the people now who are in the hospital.
When it finally emerged, the truth was unbelievable. 28 dead and many more maimed and mutilated. Omagh, a once ordinary town, had been transformed by tragedy. Philomena Skelton was one of those who died. Her daughter and husband survived.
The wife was lying face down and the rubble on the clothes blew over and her hand was out. And I reached for her arm to see, find her pulse. I could find nothing. Her legs were twisted up. And I tried for pulse again. I knew she was dead. I knew she was dead.
Shame on you. Shame on you for killing the innocent and the good. Shame on you for maiming and scarring people for life. Shame on you for bringing pain and loneliness to so many homes. Shame on you.
The politicians' priority is to prevent this ever happening again. Dublin is to introduce tough new measures making it easier to convict dissident Republicans. The British government will do likewise. But it's too late for the 28 men, women and children slaughtered last Saturday. The attack that ripped this community apart was over in just a few seconds. But in that short time, it destroyed lives and it broke hearts. Maybe, just maybe, it also made the people who did it realise the pointlessness of their actions. Bernadette Keogh, BBC News at Tyrone County Hospital in Omagh.
Well, joining me from our Belfast studio to assess the longer-term implications of the bomb is the editor of the Belfast Telegraph, Ed Curran. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Is this another bomb attack, or has something changed with what happened in Omagh?
Well, I think there have been various milestones over the past 30 years of the Troubles, and on each occasion when a terrible act of violence has taken place, it has chipped away a little bit at the edifice of terrorism and at those who have supported it. And I cannot think of any single act that has done more than this particular one to do that.
But haven't we been here before, I don't know, with Enniskillen several years ago, Grey Steel more recently?
Yes, I think we certainly have been here before on many occasions, but what has made this one different has been the fact that it has led to a galvanizing of opinion, Protestant and Catholic, Unionist and Nationalist, right across the island of Ireland, in a way that has never happened before. And there appears to be a commitment from both the British and Irish governments and from Unionists and Nationalists alike to isolate the bombers in a way that hasn't happened before. And this will also mean, I think, that the security forces will get cooperation, the like of which they've never had before.
Have you seen this in your newspaper, the reactions, not only of the politicians, but perhaps the people, ordinary people who've contacted the paper?
Well, I think that at the beginning of the week, the often used phrase was, no words can describe what has happened. And of course, words have to be found to describe what has happened here, and words have been found. And I think some of our readers, some of the bereaved, the ministers of religion and journalists, broadcasters and writing journalists have described most eloquently and poignantly what has happened this week. And if something does come across to me, it is that if, for once perhaps, the pen has proved to be mightier than the sword.
Yes, of course, at the start of the week, people were saying this could fatally undermine the peace process. Your argument seems to be that actually it could perversely prove to have strengthened it.
Well, I'm not saying that it has strengthened it. What I'm saying is that it has brought together very much those people who have been involved in the peace process. There have been divisions between Unionists and Nationalists, even those who are on the same side of the fence as far as the Good Friday Agreement is concerned. And I think that they have been brought closer together in churches, if only in mourning this week. Who would ever have believed, for example, that the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party would have been applauded in a Catholic church, sitting nearby the President of Ireland and, of course, the Sinn Féin leaders Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams. It's these symbolic acts, I think, that will have brought many of these people a little bit closer in mind. Of course, at the same time, the dissidents, and I don't mean the Republican dissidents, I mean mean the many unionist dissidents, it remains to be seen what their reaction will be, and I think a new political debate will obviously emerge next week.
Ed Curran, many thanks indeed.
It's coming up to 10 to 8 now with the Edinburgh Festival in full swing. You'd be hard pushed to miss culture in the Scottish capital. But before the next festival starts swinging, the new Scottish Parliament will be established, and many Scottish artists are hoping for a cultural renaissance that will last well beyond the festival. Our arts correspondent Nick Hyam is in Edinburgh. Nick, good morning.
Good morning, Sophie. Yes, I'm here in the old Royal High School in Edinburgh and in the room which was originally meant to be the debating chamber for the new Scottish Parliament. Now, next May, when Scots finally get their Parliament after 300 years of waiting, it's said that the arts will have a very important role to play in forging a sense of national identity for the new country. But what should the new Parliament's arts policy be, and just what is Scottish culture anyway? Say the word Scottish culture, and many people instantly think of this, the Scotland of Braveheart and tartans, bagpipes and Loch Ness. Yet there's always been more to the arts in Scotland than the cliché suggests. At Edinburgh's second annual craft fair, one of the largest in Europe, there's precious little that's obviously traditional.
There is a sort of Scottishness to some extent, but not in the sort of way that people used to think of it, like tartan dollies and Scotty dogs and that kind of stuff. I think Scotland wants to look a bit more towards Europe and sort of take its place amongst the Europeans.
Edinburgh's neoclassical Royal High School is a reminder that Scotland's always embraced the best of European culture. Once this building was going to house Scotland's Parliament. Instead, the Parliament will be built here, on a site by Holyrood Palace, designed not by a Scot, but by a Catalan. The building's extraordinary shape is a sign that a devolved Scotland is willing to be adventurous, outward-looking and modern. But the choice of architect surprised some.
There was a sense of shock. People suddenly started discovering what he'd done before. The tabloids discovered that one of his buildings rather sadly fell down before it was complete. Not his fault at all, I'm sure. There was a sense, I think, of, gosh, have we really selected something like this? It's almost like appointing Irving Welsh, you might say, as a poet laureate.
There was surely a time when we could exempt each other from this hatred and loathing. Surely.
Irving Welsh was at the Edinburgh Book Festival this week, reading from his new book. The author of Train Spotting proves Scottish writing is alive with vulgar vigour. But some fear the new Parliament will want to promote work that's much less challenging.
I think that now there's going to be more of a kind of official Scottish polity and an official Scottish culture. There might be temptations to try and lay down the line about what official Scottishness looks like, to have a kind of river dance phenomenon where we all sort of tap around like stormtroopers, you know, expressing some kind of stereotyped image of Scottish folk culture and so on. And I really hope that that won't happen.
The Scots are eager to assert their difference from the dominant culture of England. The question now, can the new Parliament help them to do that without sacrificing the internationalism of outlook symbolised by the Edinburgh Festival? Nick Hyam, BBC News, Edinburgh. One man who ought to know what the future holds for the Scottish arts is the chairman of the Scottish Arts Council, and he's with me now. He's Magnus Linklater. Good morning, thank you for joining us. There is a danger, isn't there, particularly I think if the Scottish nationalists form the new administration in Scotland, that there could be a rather narrow focus on a kind of national, official, traditional Scottish culture. Do you see that?
Well, it could happen, I suppose, but actually I don't think it will. I think there's a new younger generation of audiences and artists and writers and musicians who are not obsessed by those old narrow traditions and who really look elsewhere. They look to America, they look to Europe particularly. I think it's a very open and accessible culture.
Do you, at the Scottish Arts Council, feel obliged to put at least some money into traditional Scottish arts as well as things like opera and theatre?
Well, in fact, we've been putting more into traditional arts, but that's not the old-fashioned narrow form of traditional arts. It's a development of it. Young people are tremendously interested in Scottish dancing, in Scottish folk traditions, but they like to develop them to find new forms of it.
Do you think that Scotland needs a Minister of Culture? And if so, what should that minister be trying to do?
Well, I think it's a very good idea. After all, it's a tremendous opportunity, a new Parliament, to put the arts right up there, to give it a high priority. And a Minister of Culture would do exactly that. I think it would give it a prominence that it needs.
Would that make life difficult for you at the Scottish Arts Council? Arts councils and ministers of culture don't always get on.
Life's always difficult for us. But actually, I think it would change our role. But I don't think that matters. I think they'd always need a form of Arts Council. I think we work very well with the Minister of Culture.
Now, the Scots have gone to Catalonia for an architect for their new parliament. And there are a lot of parallels, really, between Catalonia and Scotland as a sort of devolved country within a national state. But the experience in Catalonia, I gather, talking to Catalan artists, has very much been that the politicians like simple solutions. They like something which they can say is obviously Catalan. Surely that will, in the final analysis, happen here, won't it?
No, I don't think so. I think that actually, in the end, whatever the politicians say and do, it's the artists who matter. It's the people who are making the culture who will make the new policy. I think it will come from the grassroots upwards.
OK, Magnus Linklater, thank you very much. We're here in the Royal High School, which, although it's never going to be a Parliament building, is just at the moment something of an international Parliament of artists. It's part of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. There are theatre groups here from Zimbabwe, Croatia, Russia, all over the globe. So it's very much an international perspective. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks very much indeed. And time now to hand to the weather. And here's Isabel.
Thanks, John. We're going to stay in Scotland, and this is the scene in Aberdeen. It's, well, there has been a little bit of brightness first thing this morning, but there's a lot of cloud around, as you can see. And I think through the day, we'll see that tending to thin to give a little bit of brightness at times through this afternoon, and there will be just the odd shower. Now, if we take a look at the rest of the country for the start of the day, then we can see that thicker cloud across the north, a few shy bits of rain, but do expect some brightness also for Edinburgh. I think a little bit of brightness coming through. But further to the south, the cloud thickens up rather dark across the south there, and there's outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Quite a grim start for many of us, but we will see an improvement. The thicker cloud gradually pushing its way south in towards the Channel, down across into Devon and Cornwall. So here probably staying quite murky for most of the day, but elsewhere we'll see that cloud gradually thinning from the north, and there'll be little bits of bright or sunny weather creeping through, especially this afternoon. But then we'll see some showers. Now, already some showers in northern Scotland. I think these will become more widespread across the north today. Just one or two across northern England and also into Northern Ireland, though, later on. So most of the activity in the north, but drying up quite well in the southern areas. Quite a windy start, though, in the south, although the wind's easing a little bit here through the afternoon. Quite strong northwesterlies there, feeding in quite cool air across the north of Britain. Temperatures around 18 Celsius or so, but in the southeast again, pretty warm at 22 degrees. That's 72 Fahrenheit. Now, tonight, many areas in central parts of Britain will be dry. Still that frontal band there, giving a little bit of murky weather in Devon and Cornwall. A few showers in the north, but it will be quite a chilly night in the north tonight. Some of the glens of Scotland down to 4 or 5 Celsius. And then for this coming weekend, well, a bit of a change from the west with rain spreading in on Sunday. But for Saturday, many areas fine, and probably southeastern Britain seeing the driest and brightest of the weather. And that's it for now.
Isabel, thank you very much. Coming up on Breakfast News, President Clinton defends airstrikes against suspected terrorist targets in Afghanistan and Sudan. He linked them to the US bombings in Africa and said terrorists were planning more attacks.
And how even relatively small quantities of alcohol can damage your chances of getting pregnant. But first, the news, travel and weather, where you are.